Hi, my name's Paul Baines. I'm Professor of Political Marketing at the University of Leicester and co-author of Fundamentals of Marketing, second edition by Oxford University Press with Sophie Whitehouse, Sarah Rosengren and Paolo Antonetti. In this next clip, we talk to Emin Can Turan, marketing strategist and investor at Clicked, the dating app. Jan, tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are today.
Thank you, Paul, for the introduction. So in the last 7 years of my career, I have been consulting and investing in leading tech startups in my free time. I take a very systematic approach in terms of who I should actually invest in and spend my time with in growing them to the next level of VC investments. The Clicked dating app was definitely one of my foremost favorite investments so far.
Tell us how Clicked came into being, how it got started, and a little bit about the management team.
So the management team have a very unique background, starting with Michael, who is the CEO and founder. And he used to be a very, very successful lawyer, and he gave it all up in order to start this enterprise. His right-hand man is Matthew, who's the COO and used to actually work also in the armed forces and other large corporations, and he is also currently running this with him alongside.
How did the company come into being?
Unlike most founders who actually find a gap in the market when they are either at work or doing something in their normal lives, Michael took a very systematic approach in terms of finding growth in different industries and trying to identify a gap in the market. His systematic approach finally led him to identify that there was indeed a gap in the market within the dating sector, and it was in fact exponentially growing.
Tell us how being an SME impacts on your marketing strategy.
Well, unlike our larger incumbents, we don't have unlimited resources. So we need to be very smart at how we A, spend our budget, and also B, how we can prioritize our time accordingly. Now, with that in mind, you need to first understand who your ideal customers is. As we call it in marketing, your ideal persona. Knowing that, you need to be able to understand what marketing channels and the latest technological developments in marketing you can utilize in order to go after these customers. By doing so, you'll be much better off than the larger companies.
Tell us about your client base and how they're segmented.
Well, our segmentation has holistically 3 dimensions. In the top dimensions, you have 2 segments, which are Generation Z, who are our digital natives, and millennials, who are also quite technologically astute. Our second layer are divvied up by gender, so male and female. And lastly, our third layer is around our values, beliefs, and interests, which ties in very well with our concepts at Clicked.
So what do you mean by that?
So our USP is actually connected to the values, interests, and beliefs. We have a binary question technique which is based on pictures. So for example, if you create your own matching technique, so before anyone can match with you, they need to pass your questions. Now, a question could, for example, be go with the flow or plan before you go on a holiday. Say if you are someone that really wants to plan everything beforehand and you have someone that goes with the flow, you may not want to go on holidays with that person. Unlike our competitors that only do a matchmaking technique based on looks, which eventually resulted in swiping fatigue with Generation Z and with millennials alike, we put individuality first, and therefore we put values, interests, and beliefs at our core.
Tell us about your business model.
Well, our business model is quite interesting. We have something called a freemium business model. A big part of it is free, and there is a small part that is actually paid for. The free bit is where a user gets, by standard, every day 100 carefully selected recommendations of potential matches that they can do the test of. Now, as a person, you can select a match, then do their test, and if you pass their test, they'll get a notification. Equally, if they find you interesting, they'll do your test, and if they pass, then you can chat to each other. So we don't hold off any people from actually having quality dates. However, if you do want to have some more kind of edge towards it, you can have, for example, the premium side of this would be having a second chance, as we call it. So you do someone else's test, you fail, but you get a second chance. Equally, as someone that wants to make the best out of their limited time, for example, you have a very high-level career and you want to make sure that any date you go on to is actually a good date, instead of 3 questions, you can have 5 questions, making it much harder for you to match with someone.
Describe a problem that you faced that required the use of marketing analytics.
Well, if you start competing against the big incumbents, you need to be clever about this. Our cost per acquisition for each user coming into our app needs to be much less than, for example, typical what the big incumbents pay for, because they have larger budgets. Typically, their cost per acquisition, the CPA, is between £2.5 and £5. And we had to be much more clever in terms of getting that momentum. As you recall, we have to get the momentum and cross the chasm, which is a marketing term, in order to get that momentum started. Now, in order to do so, we had to identify who our most valuable and also most engaged quartile of users were on our app. So who is our ideal persona? After identifying them, we had to find out in terms of, fine, now that we know who they are, we also had to understand much deeper in terms of what was on their minds currently, what did they care about, again, around the values, interests, and beliefs. Having done, and since we have our own data, we analyzed our own data, and we understood that, for example, at that current time, they were very much interested in Brexit and also Harry Potter. We could identify this by looking at the typical questions that they use within their matching criteria. And guess what? For Harry Potter, it was Slytherin versus Gryffindor. And for in terms of politics in Brexit, it was Brexit or Remain.
Tell us how you solved the problem.
We used our strength, which is, again, our matching technique. So we knew exactly who our most engaged personas were. So first, we identified who our most engaged personas were on our app. And then we started digging in terms of what makes them tick, in terms of what are they interested in, what is on their minds. And we identified that currently, at that time, it was Brexit and Harry Potter. So digging in more, we also identified which channel or typical which channels they were using, because they typically tend to log in via Facebook. Now, by really thoroughly understanding our highly engaged users, we could identify also that there were similar people that we could go after that would also equally be very interested in our app. Bearing in mind that we now knew that the 2 trending interests of Generation Z and Millennials were A, Harry Potter, and B, Brexit, we came up with a clever way to serve them ad campaigns where they were at. And guess where that was? Harry Potter conventions and Labour and Conservative conventions.